All right, well, let's go ahead and finish up our midseason breakdown for the Spurs bench this time. So, we're not going to do everybody on the roster because obviously, like, just being honest, me and Ethan haven't been zoned in on the CD Sissoko Austin Spurs tape or the David Duke Jr. tape.
Yeah,
um, or we haven't really seen much of Mamu or our boy Devonte Graham. Speaking of which, I didn't. Maybe I just missed him out there, but I don't think I saw him on the bench tonight. Did you?
I wasn't looking, so I don't remember.
It'll just be that could potentially be a buyout market, and there's the
Mm,
I'm not even trying to get into this, but there's the Killian Hayes rumors and stuff like that. So maybe they would want to buy out Devonte and then have Killian as the third stringer. Killian has a lot of work to do. You go back and watch our Pistons post game, and I remember you talking about his defense.
mm.
So, and I there's a whole lot of conversation about that. That's the only reason I bring that up. But I also could have totally just missed Devonte out there. He is at the end of the bench, so I could have just missed him. I miss Ken Birch all the time.
Yes, you did. You always miss Kim.
Okay, well, Aaliyah says that Devonte was on the bench, so okay, that theory, throw that one out. Um, but there are five guys that we settled on to talk about, and that's Blake Wesley, Malachi Branham, Shetty Osman, Dominic Barlow, and Zach Collins. Ethan,
Mm.
do you want to start with your boy? You want to start with old Blake Wesley?
My guy, Blake Wesley.
Yes.
I would love to. Early in the season, it was a little bit of a struggle, as we kind of predicted. We both thought he would spend most of his time in Austin, which he did, and we were hoping that he'd get some rotational minutes kind of later in the season. What happened? Exactly that. And Blake Wesley, I don't have his stats pulled up in front of me.
Look what I got you, Ethan. If you go back to our restream,
Oh, beautiful. Look at that. Only averaging basically 4 and 3 game on 51% shooting. Yeah, do you have his turnover stats? Do you know how many turnovers he's averaging a game?
let me get you here.
I appreciate it.
No problem.
Let's
It
see. Less than 1. Less than 1, and that's down from 2 that he had last season. I know he's not playing as many minutes technically. He's got 18 last year, only 12 this year, but efficiency is up and turnovers are down for Blake Wesley. And I think that's the biggest story for him. Last year, his biggest problem was decision making. He's making the right passes this year, and defensively, he has really taken up the challenge. And I watched some of his early like preseason interviews as well as his interviews as of late, and the theme for him has not changed. At the beginning of the year, he said defense was his biggest focus, and now he's continuing to say defense is his biggest focus. And that's been clear. He's picking up guys full court. He's provided a new spark and energy for us and the defensive second unit that we didn't really have prior to him getting minutes. As much as I like Malachi, who's also struggled at times, and it is better in Blake in some cases, defensively, it's not even a contest. Blake Wesley's a much better defender. And in transition, he's been dynamite. We saw a couple great dunks, including tonight. So he's not a perfect player. He's not filling up the box score, but he has made strides in his weakest areas, which is why I'm so high on this young point guard, who most people had written off prior to the year had even started.
I think that the way that he's developed this season has been I mean, I don't even know how to describe it. I mean, I do know how to describe it. It's been a really good thing. But it's been really good to see when you consider that it kind of felt like he might be in Austin for most of the year at the beginning of the season.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the way that it looked in Austin with a lot of successful games, a lot of 20-point scoring games, developing a two-man game with Dominic Barlow as well down there. And just getting controlled. I've already said this in a lot of our other post games, but he's just honed, he's controlled, and his basketball IQ is higher. That's what I
Mm-hmm.
would say. And the college game is very different than the NBA game. It feels eerily reminiscent, and a lot of people may disagree with this, Ethan, but I still see it right now in the little flashes that we got. It feels reminiscent to the development of a DeJounte Murray or a Derek White. I'm not saying he's going to be as good as either of those guys, but I'm just saying that whenever it comes to a young guard playing in the G League that's kind of a combo guard too. We mentioned the rotations to get back into the Brooklyn game a little bit. While we didn't see him in the third quarter, then we randomly saw him playing the two next to Trey in the fourth quarter. So a young combo guard that in his second season, you're starting to see some of the stuff that he became consistent with in Austin now that he's getting some spot minutes kind of later in the year. And that's kind of how we introduced DeJounte and Derek into the lineup, if you want to go back into the Spurs memory bank.
Mhm. Absolutely. And to add a little bow to this, just his body language and how he's carrying himself as well. Like last season, he looked very lackadaisical, very much like a 19-year-old, just kind of having fun out there. This season, I don't think I see him smile. Like he really
Yeah.
has stayed focused and stoic all year long, and I think that that's translating on the court for him.
Yeah, he's getting more physical. His defense, his speed, the way that he keeps pace, um, it's really night and day, especially
Mm,
unfortunately, when you compare it to Malachi. And that's like the flip side of the G League. Like as much as it's the G League, that's the type of stuff that when you go down there, like that's why he's able to kind of jump Malachi all of a sudden, because he's been kind of honing all of those things down there where maybe Malachi's, he's not able to do it as much just because of his role on the team, but
mm,
also because of his role on the team and being on the actual roster, he might be a little bit more worried about not making mistakes, et cetera, et cetera. Um, so shout out to the Austin Spurs development for Blake Wesley, because if we didn't have him right now, it would be even more ugly on the bench.
absolutely. We'd have Devontae out there.
Well, he'd win us the championship according to
Yeah,
our
you're right.
comments last post game, Ethan.
You're right. You're right. We might be way more competitive with my guy Devontae.
All right. Well, let's move on, Ethan. Any final things on Blake?
No, sir. He's my guy. I love him. I hope he knows I'm here for him.
We need to send him that and then see what he thinks.
Well, he's stoic now. He probably wouldn't even watch it. My guy doesn't
Oh,
even get
that's
on the phone.
true. He wouldn't react.
Mm-mm, not at all.
I don't know why I'm going to the schedule here. Need to go to the roster. Okay. Malachi Branham. It has definitely been, unfortunately, if we're just being honest, a disappointing season for Malachi. With the flashes that he showed last season, I mean, he's even averaging less points than he was last year.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I guess more assists. I mean, but those little numbers, I'm not really going to get into those. He's playing a little bit less minutes as well. Um, when I thought about Malachi coming into this season, Ethan, and I was thinking about, okay, what is his role going to be on this team? I was thinking about, okay, somebody who can maybe be, you know, taking close to the most shots off our bench, being a mid range scorer, coming off screens, pulling up off the dribble. We described that as butter coming into
Mm-hmm.
this season, because that's really what it felt like. And we even saw a little bit of more development in the summer league as well. But really, that latter half of the season last year, kind of where we saw the flash of Zach playing so well, that kind
Mm-hmm.
of coincided with Malachi, who obviously was kind of thrust into that position because of Trey's injury. But man, all of those things, Ethan, maybe you saw it a little bit at the beginning of the year. I feel like he might have started out a little bit better. Um, but it's just really kind of been a downturn and a struggle since, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think this can be defined as the sophomore slump for Malachi Branham. It has been disappointing. Blah 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 is right. I think I predicted that he'd be around 12 to 15 points a game this season, and if you would just base it on what he did last year, I don't think that's outrageous to say. But you're right; he's dropped in points and dropped in efficiency, and he looks displaced. I don't know what it is, but he's not getting to his spots as easily. He feels like he's in a different role. Um, I don't know the reasoning behind it, but with regardless, he's not playing as well as we would have hoped. And defensively, we knew that was one of his biggest deficiencies, and that really hasn't improved all that much either. So it's really baffling because if you remember back to the preseason and offseason interviews of the other guys, they were being asked like who had the best offseason, and he was the guy they talked about. They were like Malachi Branham has had a great offseason. He's looking forward to showing you guys some new stuff, and it just hasn't translated for him. I'm hoping it's just a shooting slump, and it's affected his confidence and something that he'll turn around going into next season. I'm still like high on his potential, obviously, because of what we've seen in flashes. Um, but I also think it's a good thing that he's in Pop's doghouse a little bit and was benched for a few games for Blake Wesley. I think that that's actually a good thing because how he responds to this will tell us a lot about his character.
Absolutely. And, I just mentioned like it felt like he had a much better start to the year. And as I pulled up his game log, Ethan, you can just see the drop off. It's kind of insane. Like, and while these aren't like crazy numbers, this is like what we're expecting kind of on the role of this team. Like, if you look at December, yes, there's two offers in there, but every other game is over double digits. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? With even a 19-point game and a close game against the Lakers, you know.
Mm.
Um, and then here we go in January, man. I mean, 2024. Look at this. 2 games over double digits. It's kind of like it's wild. It's been wild to see this.
And in February, so far, not 1/7. Seven's been his highest scoring night. It's I don't know. I don't know what the reasoning behind it is. It could have a little something to do with Keldon Johnson being moved to the bench and Zach
That's
Collins being
true.
moved to the bench.
That's true.
Like, as much as we talk about their roles changing and affecting how they've been playing, I guess we do have to say the same for Malachi. Because before he was, I guess at first he was the go-to scorer off the bench with Trey facilitating, um, but now he's not. He's not that guy. I feel like he's being asked to do more facilitation and less isolation scoring or coming off of screens, which is really what he's best at.
Yeah, and he's doing more spot up shooting. And
Yes.
that's not necessarily his strength whenever it comes to shooting either.
So we flopped him and Blake because what's Blake's a pretty solid facilitator. He doesn't need the ball. He's not a great scorer. So it makes sense strategically to play him next to Keldon and Zach rather than Malachi at times.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm not out on him, and maybe we've mentioned this before. Obviously, not everybody that we have on this team right now moving forward is going to be with us forever.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure, a lot of these young guys, they may end up getting moved somewhere if the fit isn't right, or depending on if we draft somebody next year, depending on how many picks we have. Um, and that person just, comes in and is already ahead of somebody like maybe who we're discussing right now. I hate to put it that way. I don't want to look too far ahead because with the flashes we saw last year, and I love how the lights just went off, that's just perfect. But at least you can still see me.
Yeah,
Um,
you look great.
Thank you. Um, I'm not completely out on him, but if this continues, maybe there's a change of scenery. I don't want to get too far ahead. I think he can definitely still be developed with the flashes that I've seen. He's 20 years old, his second year in the league on this team. There's so much context to that as well. Um,
Mm-hmm. I think for him, it comes back to what Aaliyah said right here. I'm going to pull up her comment.
go for it.
Malachi needs to stay confident.
I
I
think
think
that's a
that's
good
it.
way
He's
to
to
put it.
stay confident, and he needs to, in the off season, work on spot up shooting and facilitation and defense. Obviously, how do I hide this?
I was about to ask. Well, I will go turn on my light here in a second, Ethan. But
Okay.
before I do that, we're going to move on to the next guy on the bench who has really been the most consistent guy on the bench for the Spurs, unquestionably, and a man who maybe we weren't sure was going to be here after last Thursday. And
Mm.
that is, of course, Shetty Osman. And I'm really glad he's still here. I would like to say that to start. But you can go ahead and start with that if you would like to, Ethan.
My pleasure. Um, I agree. I was really hoping we were going to be able to keep Chetty Osman on the team because he's been the most consistent bench player for us. He's been a strong finisher, a strong floor spacer, and defender. He just doesn't make any mistakes. And I think he is this season's better version of what we had in Keita Bates Diop last year. How we always talked about Keita being a guy that makes minimal mistakes and always makes the right play. But where Chetty's better than Keita is that he can actually put the ball on the floor and create for others. And he's probably a slightly better 3-point shooter as far as efficiency is concerned. So from that standpoint, I've been very pleased. I don't have any negatives to say about Mr. Osman. I hope we can keep him for as long as we possibly can because he's a role player that can fit and plug in next to anybody and be successful.
Yeah, I remember his first interview, watching it when he got here. And of course, so many players with these European backgrounds have a lot of admiration for the Spurs. And that was the same case with Shetty. He said
Mhm.
it's a place he's wanted to play his whole career. And he literally said that. He said most players from Europe, want to play for the Spurs at one point, just because of their play style. It's very similar. And he was like, the play style that they play is the play style I want to play. And I think, obviously he can fit anywhere, like you said. But I definitely have seen that translate since he's gotten here. And
Mhm.
the other thing that I'll say about Shetty too is he would be somebody like you said that I mean, think about it. He's only 28, so he'll be 29. Basically at the end of the season because his birthday's in April. So if you signed him to a 3-year deal, you've got him from 29 to 32. Maybe even if you wanted to do longer than that, I doubt the Spurs will, just because they want to stay flexible. But I
Mhm.
could see like a 3-year deal for Shetty where he just kind of stays out here, in the rest of his prime and is just a nice role player that can match whatever we decide to do with whoever we draft or maybe whatever moves we make, just building around Victor.
Mhm. Yeah, because you're right. At some point, we're gonna have to go find veteran role players to fill in next to our young core. Um, why not go ahead and sign one of those right now? I like that.
Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see there, but it also wouldn't completely surprise me if, this is just a 1-year thing and we say sayonara. Because especially with the draft, it's just,
Yeah,
you know,
it's tough to know.
right. But really solid. I mean, just gives effort, physical, can score at all three levels. Maybe he has a stinker here and there, but even when he has a stinker, he's fighting hard and playing good defense.
1000%. And he really moves the ball well, like underrated ball mover as well.
Point guard, point guard start under his belt. Never forget
That's right. Point
that
Chetty,
that one game.
point guard
Oh,
start.
that
Yeah,
it's
I
just
remember
so,
that. Yeah,
and it's funny too because we're talking about him on the bench right now, and it's like that's right, he did have that.
I love how Marcus Morris Senior's technically on our ESPN roster as well.
I know they're so great. Thank you, ESPN. Well, he hasn't been cut yet, so I guess that's actually yeah, good
Yeah.
job, good on you. Okay, now it is time for our guy, Zach Collins. We already talked a lot about this, obviously, Ethan, in the post game,
Hmm.
um, but I'll just dish it to you for overall season thoughts on Zach.
Statistically, he's about where he was last year. He's actually slightly better, I guess, but the biggest drawback for Zach this season has been efficiency, especially from 3 point land. He's down 10 whole percentage points. He went from 37 last year to 28 now. And that's been his biggest difficulty. I think that's where his loss of confidence really stems from because once he lost that, he stopped being as aggressive down low. He stopped being aggressive on rebounding, and we've really seen a dip as of late, pretty much from December on, I would say. He's been struggling. Obviously, that's been along with a role change. He started as the starting center next to Wemby. Now he's coming off the bench, also had an injury. So it hasn't been a perfect year as far as circumstances for Zach Collins. But we already talked about it at length. It's been difficult nonetheless and underwhelming.
As I'm looking at the game log, and obviously that doesn't mean everything, Ethan, but it's really eerily similar to Malachi. Um, you know, at the end of December, you kind of see it start. But really, he had a nice stretch of games there for a
Hmm.
while, at least scoring wise, and was efficient for the most part. Other than a couple here and there. But once again, well, actually, no, I was wrong. That's November. My bad. Here's December, but you still see, for the most part, not anything too terrible. But then
January was rough.
you just kind of see the drop off where it's not necessarily to the same at Malachi's level, but you can start to see it. And there's some injuries in here as well. That's why the beginning of January he's not playing. That's when Barlow was in. But since the Barlow injury, you were hoping to kind of see what you're seeing down here a little bit more, and we haven't been seeing it as much. And that's why this conversation has any legitimacy. And Pop benched him tonight for Barlow, basically.
Yep. Tough. Poor Zach.
I know, man. I wish I had more to say, but we kind of already covered it
Mm-hmm.
earlier. And yeah, just to sum up some things, defensively is really the thing that gets me when because unfortunately the defensive deficiencies are kind of always there to an extent. You know, at the end of last year, as we've talked about on this channel a bunch of times, Ethan, it felt like his interior defense got better. It kind of feels like a reversion this season. Um, and then on top of that, he just hasn't really been hitting shots. And when you take away the threes, like you said, like a 10% drop off, like that's one of the things that was like key to his game, you
Mm-hmm.
know, and one of the things that was super appealing. So when you take that away, and the overall shooting efficiency is also dipped a little bit, and then you're kind of reverting a little bit on defense too. It's just that it's a combination of a lot of unfortunate negatives
Mm-hmm.
that, once again, not to repeat myself, but that's that's why Barlow played the rest of the game today. If that context wasn't there, we're leaving him in.
Nothing to add, Your Honor.
Oh my gosh. All right. Well, since we're talking about Zach, I don't know what I was trying to do there. We're going to Barlow next. That's the point.
I love that you keep going to schedule every single time.
I know. I don't. I guess it's just I don't know how to.
No, you're fine. You're fine.
No, you're good, but it's just funny. Like, I don't know why I keep doing it too. Anyways, here, we don't need to pull up his stats because not really too many stats for old Dom Beasy, but we
Mm.
can pull up his game log. Um, Let me start off, Ethan, saying this because obviously this has been a whole thing, as we've said multiple times, and if you've watched this channel, you know that Dom Beasy holds a special place in our hearts, just like Drew Eubanks did once upon a time. And he has kind of taken up that moniker. And I was thinking about that today, Ethan, because old Drew Eubanks, he still lives on my wall right here. I got a signed poster from him. You've seen it if you're an
Mhm.
SSPN OG. I have pulled it up and brought it down here, but I'm not going to take it off my wall right now. But the whole reason I do that whole spiel is I'm actually going to start off with some negatives, just to show that we're not completely only talking about the positive with Dom all the
Mm.
time. Now, granted, I don't have a lot, but I will say we've seen him get in foul trouble. I know,
Yeah.
right? No, but we've seen him get in foul trouble throughout this season. There's going to be times where physically he'll get bullied a little bit too. Um, but even at the same time, like I just still feel like we've seen him go up, and it's different than Zach. It's still a little bit better than Zach, but because they list him at 6'9", 215, he might be 6'10", 220, depending on who you ask. But so there's going to be times where he gets got by guys sometimes that are just bigger than him, like a Nick Claxton tonight. But he's not always, he's not that. Excuse me, Ethan. Um, while he does get in foul trouble from time to time, tonight we didn't see him foul at all, and that was actually crucial because of the way that the game was going with Zach and Nick Claxton. But his interior defense is better. That's the point I'm trying to get at. I'm not saying it's like a significant jump, but I think that it from what we've seen recently. It is a little bit better than Zach's. I mean, like I could go. I don't want to repeat myself. That's why I was kind of trying to think of different ways to word it, because I've already said this on the show. But we've seen him go up and stuff Giannis. There's some other. I think Jared Allen as well in the Cleveland game, when both of those games were both close. Um, and we unfortunately see what's kind of been happened to Zach in those circumstances. I'm not saying Dom's going to get him every time, but I will say that just overall, it feels better defensively on the interior, as well as the rotations and stuff like that. But the fouls, and then also physically sometimes going to get bullied. And then there also are going to be some times where, because of his youth, he's just going to maybe make some mistakes, miss a rotation, not know where to be offensively. But really, for the most part, it feels more connected.
I think that's the biggest thing, how you finished there. It's the intangibles for Don Barlow, and it's the reason why we think he might have a case for playing over Zach Collins. And what I mean by that is his high motor and the things that don't appear on the stat sheet. I'm such a dummy. What was the last thing you said? I already forgot what it was.
Connected.
Connectedness. Good lord. his energy and what
Look,
he brings.
this is a tough like post game, and then now we're going through all this, and
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
like the
yeah.
bench was kind of the weakness. So, anyways,
Anyway, what I was saying was everyone feels more connected with him on the court instead of Zach Collins. And I think it's because of the energy that he brings, the motor that he plays with, especially defensively, going for loose balls, fighting for rebounds, extra possessions, and not afraid to get dirty. And a lot of that stems from just his raw athleticism and strength because he is undersized. And there's a lot of areas in which Zach's a better player. Zach's a better passer, better post up scorer. On paper, technically, should be a better shooter. Um, but when Zach is struggling offensively, there's really no reason Don Barlow shouldn't play over him because in every other way, he might be better. And that's just because of the raw athletic ability and gifts that he has. So you're not going to see anything crazy on the stat sheet. Only 4.5 points, 3.5 rebounds, right? Like nothing absurd. But if you watch the games, if you see the way we play with him on the court as opposed to without, there's definitely a difference.
if you want some Barlow stats, go look at the G League numbers.
Yeah, he's G League Shaq or Kevin Garnett, excuse me.
His last game, he had 22 and 12. He was the leading scorer in the G League for the beginning of the year. Um, I mean, every time he's there, it's usually around 20 and 10.
Hmm.
And it's going to take some time to translate. And the other key thing about Barlow and that's the whole reason why I was intrigued by him. Like, yes, the overtime elite thing and being the first player from there, but he didn't really pick up basketball like full time until he was a junior. And then it
Hmm.
was like he just got that opportunity at OTE, and then OTE became what it has become. Um, and then now, he's just playing in the NBA. That's why we signed him to a two-way deal 2 years in a row. Um, I don't know if we've done that with anybody yet since the two-way contracts have come out. I know that initially we signed KBD on a two-way, but I think the next season his contract was fully converted. And now, granted, that might be impending for Barlow soon. Um, but man, all the stuff that you said, you even mentioned, you talked about Zach's passing. There's even some times now where it's starting to rival Zach a little bit. Now, I'm sure Zach's been teaching him a lot of that, and I still would say that Zach overall is a better passer. But you're seeing his passing develop, you're seeing his shooting develop, the mid range game. If he can continue to extend that range, we're continue to see that improve. The whole reason I bring all of that up and I bring up the point of him just starting to play basketball is he's a late bloomer. So there's just a lot of potential for him moving forward. And that was kind of my point when I made the 20-minute breakdown video of him last season in the spring. It wasn't just like, okay, let's hop on this because, this has kind of become a thing on the channel. It was also like, yes, despite it, the numbers not being crazy last season, if you look at him in the G League and on the floor, for the Spurs and the little spurt minutes he got, there were little flashes of things that you could see. Like I remember even last year saying like he attacks space well. And
Hmm.
it's like, okay, what are you really describing, Jude? But it's like those were the little things that you could see. He does know where to place himself. Yes, like I said earlier, there might be a little bit of times where sometimes that's out of rhythm because he's like he's thrown into the game the way that he was today, and he's still 20 years old, really playing his first NBA minutes. But the development, it's another testament, like with Blake, to the Austin Spurs staff. And it really feels like he's going to be somebody a part of our future in all seriousness.
Hmm. I agree 1,000%.
Yeah. And he's the other thing about him is he's got a very solid build for the modern NBA.
Yes, he
He's
does.
able to move laterally quickly. Another thing that I mentioned here, and this will be my last thing that we'll mention before we get off, Ethan. And this was a difference that I noticed between him and Zach defensively tonight. That wasn't just on the interior, in post ups against Nick Claxton. There were a couple times I saw early in the game where Schroeder was able to basically kind of, I don't know how to describe it. Like they were like little pull up jumpers kind of in the mid range. Um, and Zach kind of, I mean, he just stayed with his guy, which is what he's supposed to do. But when Barlow was in, he was able to like not necessarily leave Claxton, but he was able to like move enough to where he could at least contest and affect the shot a little bit. And it forced a couple misses on both of those plays. There
Hmm.
were two misses that I saw where they're two makes that stand out in my mind when Zach was on the floor. And then there was one time where they got him on a lob, but that was because Cam Thomas got beat Blake off the dribble, and Blake never really gets beat off the dribble. That's a testament to Cam Thomas.
Mhm.
And then Barlow went to kind of contest his layup. And then, of course, whenever Barlow moved over, that left Claxton wide open, and then there was a lob lane. But the defensive awareness,
Mm.
that's probably how I guess I would describe that, where he's able to, he was almost kind of guarding two people at once. He's more mobile than Zach defensively. That's kind of what I'm getting at there.
Nothing to add, Your Honor.
Don't call me that again. That's the last time.
Okay, nothing to add, Mr. Jude.
There you go. There you go. All right, Ethan. Any final thoughts on the bench guys before we wrap this up?
No.
I like it. I like it.
Uh,
I think it's going to be interesting to see how everything plays out with the rest of these guys. I think Blake and Dom, it kind of seems like their roles are set. I'm not saying I think Dom's going to start from here on out, but I think we know, like if Zach's in foul trouble, you know what I mean, or if there's an
mhm.
injury, he's going to be the guy that comes in. Blake's going to be the backup point. It really comes down to Malachi and Zach. Oh, and Shetty as well. We know he's kind of in that category also. We know his role. But Malachi and Zach, I'm really interested to see how the rest of the season goes, because unfortunately, when I look at the bench and you watch the games and you just watch the film, those are the kind of two weaknesses that really stand out. But they're also both guys that I'm not completely out on at the
Mm.
same time. And I think if they can put it together, like they have skills that are serviceable that they've shown on the Spurs before can be effective.
Yeah. Agreed.